And hello everyone, thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Anthony Salas, and on behalf of the American Marketing Association, I'd like to welcome you to today's webcast sponsored by Cardinal Path and titled How to Use Your Marketing Data to Speak C-Suite. As part of our continuing efforts to be the most relevant force and voice shaping marketing around the world, the AMA offers a variety of resources, training, and tools to enhance lifelong learning and provide valuable information and connections. You can see much more information about all of our offerings if you go to ama.org. And just a few quick housekeeping items to go over with you before we begin. We are recording this full presentation, and it will be made available to you soon after, so look for that coming your way. If you could join us today on Twitter, we would truly appreciate your engagement with us at hashtag #MarketingDataForCSuite. You see that currently on your screen. So again, feel free to join us there. There's going to be a lot of good engagement from Cardinal Path as well as all the others that will be on there. So if you can do so, please be a part of that great conversation there. And if you have any questions as the presentation is going on, you're going to want to use that chat feature that you see there to the left of your screen. Any technical questions you might have, you can enter in that area as well, and we'll get to those as quickly as possible. Content-related questions, we strongly encourage you to enter those as the presentation is going on, and we'll be addressing those at the end of the formal presentation. So now it is my great pleasure to introduce our speakers for today. We're being joined by David Booth, who's the co-founder and principal consultant with Cardinal Path, and Adam Karp, who is the Chief Marketing Officer with First Dibbs. And both David and Adam have a lot of great information and insights they're going to be sharing with you today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to David, who's going to start today's presentation.
Thank you, Anthony. And I'll echo a welcome and also a thank you for being here with us today. As Anthony mentioned, my name is David Booth. I'll be walking us through today's presentation. And I have the great pleasure of having Adam Karp with me, who is the Chief Marketing Officer at First Dibbs, who's going to help to give some commentary and make some of the things that we're talking about real. And I'll just pass it over to Adam real quick to give a quick introduction on First Dibbs.
Thanks, Dave. It's great to be here. Just for everybody who doesn't know, First Dibbs is the world's leading online marketplace for high-end design. We were founded in 2001 with the mission to bring the Marché Puce online. Today, First Dibbs is the go-to source for those who share a passion for the most beautiful things on earth. We bring together more than 2,000 of the world's best dealers specializing in furniture, fine art, jewelry and watches, and vintage fashion, and offer an exclusive inventory that is not available anywhere else online.
Fantastic. So we'll keep that in mind as we go through. We're going to talk a little bit about the conceptual and then kind of bring things back to the real here. And what we're really going to be talking about today is this idea of speaking C-suite. And what that really means for us is that we're coming from a place where data is this huge new opportunity for everyone, and marketers of today are trying to make sense of all this data and trying to speak a language that has largely been driven by a technical community, which means that we have a disconnect between the things that we care about at the board level and the things that we're measuring down at the IT levels of measurement. So really what we're going to talk about here kind of comes in the context of goal setting, and goal setting from the business perspective. So I bet a lot of folks here have, it wasn't too long ago when you were sitting in the 2015 planning sessions and you were coming up with the goals that you have for your organization going into the new year. And a lot of times those things are the things that they've been for 50, 100 years. Things like we want to get the average customer value up, or we want to drive our costs down, or we want to increase a profit margin, we want to do a better job for our clients, we want to have higher revenues, we want to have a bigger number of customers. All of these things make perfect sense, and all of us can make perfect sense around these things. If all of these things go in the right direction, it's good for our business, it's good for our organization, and our goals have been achieved. The issue, though, is that when you come back and start talking in the language of marketing data and technical languages, ultimately we kind of lose ourselves and we come back to different language. So I think a big thing to think about is if you were sitting in those planning sessions with the C-suite and sitting around the table or speaking to the board, and you said that the 2015 biggest goal that you had was to drive your bounce rate down, it would be ridiculous. People would start looking at you like you had a second head, because this isn't really something that is easily relatable back to a business objective that we care about at the highest levels of the organization. And that goes for a lot of these different metrics. So you may have heard a lot of these things, right? Click-through rates and cost per clicks and spending a budget and getting more keywords you're bidding on, or dropping average positions of all these things that have to do with the SEM or the website experience. And the truth is it's really hard to drive these things back to the things that matter. And really that's kind of what we're talking about today, is this whole paradigm that's kind of shifted, that now we have this data that's embedded at these levels, but we're having a hard time articulating that in a way that makes sense and helps us to make these business decisions. So I'll put this in the context of a recent study that IBM did here, and I think it's an important one. Adam and other CMOs and folks in the marketing line of this here are feeling this pressure of using data. So data is everywhere. The digital exhaust trail we're leaving behind of everything that we're doing, every click we're making on every digital property, even offline, is now generating an enormous amount of data. And more than 7 of 10 folks who were surveyed here said that this is the thing that we're most underprepared for. We're having a really hard time making sense of all the data. And a good analogy I like to use often is there's this phenomenon of a child going to a beach for the first time and seeing the ocean for the first time and looking out at the sand and looking out at the water, seeing the waves roll in, and they look at it and say, that looks like a place I want to be. I really want to go out there and get my feet wet. And they do, and they wade out a little bit, and the first time a big wave comes, it just hits them, knocks them over, they roll around in the surf for a while and come right back to the beach. And I think in large part that's kind of the way we viewed all of this data as an industry. We love the idea of it. We think it's fantastic. We look out at this ocean of data and say, I want that, I want that. Reality here, and this was an interesting one from the most recent CMO survey, is that we get slapped by this big wave of data and we come running back to the beach of comfort and we go back to gut decision making. And see here, since February of 2012, we actually declined in our usage of data to make marketing decisions here. There was a brief spot in February of 2014 where we got ambitious again, but even in the latter part of this last fourth quarter and going into the new year here, we're dropping down to less than a third of decisions being driven by data. And I think that's indicative of the fact that we're not speaking the right language. We're having a really hard time taking all this data, which is no problem of it being available, but to try and translate it into decisions that we can make to drive the business forward. So this is really the context that we're going to speak to today, and kind of understand how we have this challenge to bridge this gap between all the technical magic and miracles that we're performing on a daily basis here, but translating that back into the C-suite or the language of business that we need to make these decisions. And ultimately it comes down to this idea of communication of this data. And we've probably all on this call or this webinar have seen this situation where we ask a question and say, how are we doing against our business objectives? And we're pointed at an Adobe Analytics account or a Google Analytics account, given some login credentials, or even sent a 50 megabyte Excel file that has the raw data from every advertising campaign we've ever run. And the problem with this is that this really isn't communicating data. This is just essentially giving the folks who need to make these decisions some very complicated access to data in a very raw form, and essentially saying, here, you figure this out. And in many cases, folks who have this access to information or this access to data really feel like they're looking at raw physics equations and trying to make some sense out of it, which means that, again, we're not bridging that gap. We have a problem with this communication. And it's fantastic science, it's great data, and it can be used to drive fantastic decisions. The issue is we're just not getting it to the right place in the right format at the right time. So, at this point, I'll kind of pass it over to Adam here. And I know Adam, we've done some work there and together, and Adam has had some experiences here with this as well.
Yeah, so 3 years ago when I got to first Dibbs, we had very little data. So the opposite of the ocean. It was more like a California reservoir. But as we built various reporting, both within sort of Google and on our platform of record, we wound up in exactly the same place that Dave talked about. Was various different reporting systems working off Excel sheets. At one point, we had 2 or 3 people working almost a full week to pull together our monthly reports, which exactly as the cliche as Dave's slide was an Excel spreadsheet with somewhere around 30 or 35 tabs. So if you go back to how does that help let us know if we're doing our business objectives really well, it takes a lot of time, and it would translate into 2-3 hour meetings every month to sort of take that technical speak and map it back into business objectives. And so we realized that for us we needed a better solution, which is sort of why we embarked on our latest project to fix that.
Great, and that's kind of where we're going to dive in. So the pleasure that Cardinal Path had to work with First Dibbs was essentially kind of flipping that model on its head, and we'll talk through that in a framework that we used here to make sure that we were speaking the right language and surfacing the right data here. But it started with the business objectives, and that's kind of where we go with these keys to success. So if anybody's feeling a little bit in the same position there, or a little bit challenged by the same issues, really the process is fairly straightforward. Number one, we want to understand what it is we want at the end. So what are these real business goals that we have, and how can we translate those back to the key performance indicators, or the KPIs, that will be made up of all of this data that can judge the success or failure against these real business goals. And once we've set up that framework and we know what data is going to be used to make what decisions and give us what feedback, then we're able to go back to this visualization layer and take a look at some of this reporting. And this reporting, in the day and age of technology where we are right now, we have this ability to rely heavily on technology to automatically extract data, manipulate that data, combine that data, and put it in a place where most of the process of report creation becomes automated, and there's no more hours and hours sitting extracting manual data pulls or querying databases and then trying to merge all that stuff into Excel for a report that ultimately no one will ever read. What we're now doing is creating these wireframes of what it is we want to see, and then feeding that data in an automated fashion, which again, to the third point here, leaves us lots and lots of time to do much more valuable things, like analyze this data and ask questions of our data that can help us with strategic direction and help us to answer questions. So that's really where we're going to go today. And it starts off with this idea of starting with the business goals. So we can take these things that came out of your 2015 planning sessions that you're working on right now, and as we close the first quarter of this year, and start to look at those in the perspective of what are the key performance indicators that we can use that would tell us if we're doing a good job at any of these business goals. So if, for example, I wanted to get more customers, you may look at a number of different metrics and a number of different dimensions that you collect from a number of different data sources. You may look at those from a perspective of segmentation. And if 5, 10, 15 KPIs that all have to do with the acquisition of new customers are trending up and to the right, you would look at that and collectively say, I have good measure, I have a good idea of what I'm doing here, and it looks to me like I'm doing a good job on this particular business goal. And that's really where we're going with this. And we do this over and over again for each of these business goals, translating them backwards towards the KPIs, and then eventually the actual components and pieces of data that will drive those KPIs. So there's lots of frameworks out there to do this. I'll just mention a couple here, but there's certainly no shortage of more. There's a net income framework here that those of you who follow Avinash Kaushik has done quite a bit of work with, and he's got some really, really good examples of this. The one that we're going to use here is a customer lifecycle framework. The customer lifecycle framework that we're going to be using is one that everybody knows. This goes back to Marketing 101 or Business 101, or even before you got to school, you probably knew most of this stuff. So we're going to walk through this and then kind of use this as a framework to define these KPIs against these business objectives. But of course, whatever framework you choose to use is really dependent on the things that matter to you. In the customer lifecycle framework, we essentially have lots of different steps here. Now there's different variations of this, but for this particular example, let's start out with this idea that we have to first attract a customer or a prospect before they become a customer. They have to know about us, and this becomes sort of that role of branding and positioning and traditional marketing to get the word out there so that I can get someone in my door or my virtual door in the online space. And once I've attracted them to whatever storefront I have, virtual or physical, I then need to engage with this customer. And as I engage with the customer, I start to interact with them. They start to interact with me, understand my product offerings, understand the solutions that I have for the problems that they need to solve. And at this point, I'm pushing them towards this third step, which is the conversion. Now, a lot of folks will stop here and say that's kind of the end all. That's where I want to be, is I get someone to give me their money, trade money for a product or service, and then I've won. But you see that this is really only halfway up the chain here, and there's lots of other things we can do with a customer. Namely, we can retain that customer and get repeat business with that customer. And as anybody will know, it is much cheaper and much more efficient to retain an existing customer and keep them happy than it is to go and find a new one. So this retention step is something that we really want to focus on as an organization. And then last, we eventually want to make our customers our biggest advocates. So our unpaid sales force, as it were, who buys our products and runs around the world telling all of their friends and family how wonderful our products and services are and that they should buy them too. So we can use this framework to essentially translate this back to a business case where I would say, if I'm doing a good job in 2015 on my business, I'm attracting more customers, I'm engaging with more of them, I'm selling more to them, getting more conversions out of them, I'm retaining more of them, and I'm turning more of them into advocates. And if this particular framework works for you, then I can take this a step further and start to assign some actual metrics and dimensions that are measurable. So I'm now taking this back to kind of the speak of this framework of the things that I really want to do. So I take, for example, each of these stages, and I just slot in the business goals that came out of my 2015 platform, planning sessions. So in the attraction stage, I may say that what I want is to get more people into my brick and mortar door or my virtual web store or my virtual web presence, whatever that happens to be on my app. Any number of things could be replaced here. But I also want to have a better brand awareness. I want to start to measure my impact out there and getting new faces and new names into my databases and into my sites and my stores. On the second side of the engagement front, once I've gotten them there, a Field of Dreams famous quote, if you build it, they don't necessarily come in the online world. So I need to get them to come to the site and then interact with my site, which means I could have as a goal to get people to the content that they want very, very quickly. So I could measure how good of a job I'm doing at providing the right content for the right users at the right time. On the conversion side, of course, I want to sell things or I want to drive leads or whatever the online goals that I have as an organization, whether I'm B2B, B2C, direct response, whatever that happens to be. This is where I'll put those goals that we think about most days of the year. And then on the retention side, I can look at things like I want more repeat business from the same customers. I also want to increase the customer lifetime value over time. And on the advocacy stage, you see, again, the same sorts of things. I want people out there talking about me and referring more business to me. And again, at this point, we're not speaking in technical speak yet. We're still talking about things that make sense to every marketer, every business owner, every business stakeholder. It would be hard to find people who disagree with this and say, I don't want to sell more things, don't want to drive more leads, those sorts of things. So we've still got the attention at that level at this point. And now we're going to go back to this model and we're going to start to fill in the gaps a little bit. So if I look at this attraction stage, I say, what are the things that I can collect from various data sources, whether that's web analytics or customer analytics or any kind of back-end systems of record or anything like that, and the field's wide open. What are the things I could collect that would tell me collectively if 5, 10, 15, 20 of these are trending up and to the right, am I doing a good job? And you can start to think of these. So things like impressions of the ads that I'm running, for example, or the clicks on the ads that I'm running. These can be proxies that tell me how much of an impact am I making out there to new people and how many people are clicking through. How many people are starting to follow me for the first time on the social networks in which I play. Some of the video ads that I'm pushing out there, how many people are looking at those, whether they're on my site or preferably off my site with impressions that I've got out on the ad networks. How many people are coming to my website for the first time? How many people are downloading my app for the first time? All of these are metrics and dimensions that can look at this particular concept of attraction and collectively tell me I'm doing a good or a poor job. Now, I wouldn't ever look at one of these on its own and say, because I'm spending more on my ads and getting more impressions out there, I'm doing a great job at attraction. I would look at these collectively and holistically. And then I move on to the engagement side. I can start to say, once they get to my web properties, my web apps, or any of the digital assets that I control, what are the things that I want them to do that are not necessarily conversions, but maybe micro-conversions or engagements that will give me this idea that I'm engaging with my customers. So things like as simple as scrolling down to the bottom of a page of text will give me a proxy measure of whether or not people are reading the content that I've gone through the trouble of creating. Or if they're using the search on my site and they're starting to give me intent signals about exactly what it is they're looking for. If they're downloading copy that I might have, or if they're bookmarking me on the social channels and things of that nature, or if they're doing anything interactive, if I put a calculator in there and they're using it, all those things collectively, if 5, 10, 15, 20 of these are all trending up in the right direction, I can say I'm doing a pretty good job at engagement. Or if they're all trending down, I can say of the 24 hours in a day that I have, I'm going to spend some time working on the ones that are not doing so well and try and help myself there, because if I can make those things better, then I've done a good job for my business by engaging more customers. Over on the conversion front here, of course, these are the ones you think about more often than not. So the online purchase from an e-commerce perspective, a phone call or a lead form being submitted on a website, all these sorts of things become the conversion actions that I have for the website itself. And then I move on to retention, and I can start to look at things like, well, what percentage of return visitors do I have on my website? Or what's the raw number of return visitors? How many people are logging in with accounts or creating accounts for the first time? How many people are being exposed to the retargeting campaigns that I have? These are all indicative of return interactions that people have with someone. And again, I wouldn't ever use one as an indication that I'm doing great at the retention stage, but if they're all together trending in the right direction, doing great. If they're trending in the wrong direction, I may want to focus some efforts there. And then on the advocacy side, you can see some more great KPIs here. So how many people are leaving reviews, or I could maybe make that more specific, leaving positive reviews. How many brand mentions are there out there on a tool like Google Trends, or something that has nothing to do with web analytics or my site in general, but just gives me an indication of the actual impact that I'm having here. People sharing content for their social networks or through email, send to friends. All these different things can help me understand how I'm doing. And then the last thing that we may want to put on top of this to make things just a little bit more relevant is this idea of segments. So I may have different segments of customers that I am targeting for very different reasons. So I may have, for example, a list of all of my most loyal customers who have been with me for 5+ years and have a certain lifetime value target that they've already achieved. And I may have targets to get them to reach out to their friends and refer friends. And I may have a campaign dedicated to that. And for that particular segment, I would be well within my rights to expect them to convert on the goals that I have, or to do well against these KPIs that I have up here in the advocacy stage. But it wouldn't be very fair to me to take a segment of people who have never heard from me before, don't know who I am, and expect them to go out on the social networks, tell everybody that I'm the best thing since sliced bread. So for that particular segment, I might have very different goals. I may count that as a success if they come to my website for the first time and engage on a few things. So again, looking at all these segments really helps you to understand the reality of your customer base and the reality of your business goals within the context of all these things that we can measure with the tools and technology of today. So Adam, you've recently been through this process with Cardinal Path, going through the business requirements documentation and trying to translate these back into the KPIs. I'm hoping you can comment a little bit on that process and how it worked for First Dibbs.
Yeah, so I think, for me, one of the most important aspects of it is it's not specific to marketing. It's not specific to one department. It's really a cross-functional exercise. And it's critical that you get buy-in and learnings from each department. So we had our product team involved, our operations team involved, our finance team involved, all who sat through stakeholder interviews, and then we all came together and sort of mapped out what exactly we were looking to answer, and how that would then map back to the project. And it takes a lot more time than people expect. It's definitely an investment from a time standpoint. I think it's one that's well worth it. A lot of interesting debates came up in terms of, while the slide that you had right before is sort of, the prototype slide that you see all the time, exactly which micro-conversions fit in convert versus engage versus retain can lead to some really interesting debates internally. It also brings up questions that we currently weren't answering through our analysis, and I think that's what really was interesting and important. May sound obvious, but people were just so used to sort of getting the technical data that we were providing that they didn't raise their hand and say, here's the question that I'd like answered. And through this process, we discovered a number of those opportunities. And then, one of the things you find out is that a lot of what you're doing, as buttoned up as it is, as great as our analysts are, tends to be informal. And so this helped us formalize, great example would be customer segments. So what is an inactive customer versus a frequent customer or an engaged customer? There are various definitions floating around in the company, and through the exercise it really helps to put a focus on that and force us to pick one.
Yeah, that's a great point. If nothing else, going through this process really helps from the governance perspective to put definitions around things that you may be throwing around the organization and actually have very different meanings from one department to another, or even from different stakeholders within the same department. So ultimately for First Dibbs here, we'll kind of continue down this path of the framework for making this a little bit more real, and we'll take this conversion segment here. So when we've gone through this process of understanding what are the things that really matter from this conversion perspective at the highest levels of the organization. The idea is, we want to get things like more dealer contacts. We want to get more people registered on the site, more online orders that are happening, and we can start to break these down into the actual KPIs that we're going to be used. Now, of course, there were many, many more here, but this is an idea of what those actually were. So at the highest level, if we were to say that registrations are going up and to the right, dealer contacts are going up and to the right, online orders are going up and to the right, the costs per each of these actions are going down, or the revenues for these are going up, all those things are positive indicators that would tell us that we're doing a pretty good job in this conversion area. And if we're not doing a great job, we can start to look into each of these KPIs and understand what's happening. So maybe we're getting lots more orders, but the average order value has been going down. This set of KPIs would really help us to understand that. And then we layer in on top of that these segments that we had been talking a little bit about. And segments can certainly be customer segments like buyer type or visitor type or buyer status here, but you also see some of these segments that apply more to marketing mediums. So we have actual mediums or sources or campaigns or even a tactic, whether this is more of an upper funnel activity at the branding side or a lower funnel direct response activity. All of these segments can then be overlaid, and by creating this document, which is really just a spreadsheet of all of these KPIs and the segments that we want to take a look at them in the context of, we now have this ability to answer an enormous amount of business questions that all relate back, in this case, to the conversion segment of this framework that we've been using. So once you've done this for each of those elements of the framework, and again, we're using that customer journey framework, but you could certainly use any of the others, we're just giving it a way to map all of these things that we're now starting to talk about, these technical terms that make folks' eyes roll over. Now we're relating these back very specifically to business objectives that we really, really care about and that drive our organizations forward. So the next step then is, when we have all of this documented, that's great. We've got this theoretical document, a big business requirements document filled with all the business goals that we have laid out against this framework and the KPIs that will drive those. Now it's time to start getting to a point where we can actually enact this. And this is where we kind of translate that just one step further into the technical layers. Now that's not really the purpose of today's webinar, but we do have to talk about how it becomes real, which is to say we've got the framework that we chose. We now have mapped out all of these KPIs, all the segments that we care about against those business goals, and ultimately we have to bridge this gap between this theoretical business requirements documentation and the visualizations and reports that will actually collect and show us this data in a way that we want to see it. And the way we do that is really with this kind of mapping. So to get to this ideal state of a dashboard that you may look at this mock-up and say that's exactly what I need to help me plan my day. At the highest levels, I want to get to a place where I use this particular framework. I've got each of these stages of attraction, engagement, conversion, retention, and advocacy, and I've got a number of KPIs for each one. And then in one place on my iPad, for example, I can open this up. I can see which of my areas requires my attention, which of my areas I'm doing well at, and if I have any details that I want to go dig into, I can use these tabs at the bottom to go into the details of each one of these. So in this particular example, I can see that I look at this on my Monday morning and say I'm doing great at retaining customers here. I'm having a really hard time with the advocacy stage. I tend to be doing pretty well with engaging and converting, but I'm not attracting them as well as I should. And I can start to plan out my week. So I'm not going to spend much time on the retention side. I'm not going to spend much time on engage and convert. I'm probably going to spend a lot of time here making advocates out of my customers because I've defined that that's important to me, or attracting new customers. And I'll go in and click on one of these, so the advocacy side or the attraction side, and I can start to see all those details. So I start to see this hierarchy of data. And this is being fed by a very technical solution. And we'll get to that in just a second here. But this is kind of the ideal state that I want to be at. And if you look at it from this idea of the iceberg model, if that's the part that I see, at the very top, I see these reports with this high-level overview of everything that's happening across my organization that I care about, tied directly back to business objectives in a visualization that is literally as simple as green is good, red is bad, and orange means okay. Then I want to be able to see all these things in more detail by diving in. I have to then look at what's under the water. And that's really the technical side that we have to get right. And it's the unsexy stuff, it's the data, it's the integrations, it's all the data preparation and data storage and data extraction and all those scary terms that come from the technical world. But again, if I've done this right, and I trust all of this has been done right, I really never have to take a look at it, and I can spend most of my time outside of these tools, outside of data preparation and manipulating data inside Excel spreadsheets or making manual queries, and I can spend my time on the things that matter. So this is really what we're going to talk about, is just connecting this underwater part to the tip of the iceberg that we're going to spend most of our time looking at and making decisions on. And really the extra steps here are not that mysterious. What we do is we take each of these KPIs that we've driven into this framework of the conversion lifecycle in this case, and then we say, what data do we need in order to drive this KPI? So we like the idea of new registrations. So how are we going to measure new registrations? Well, maybe we're going to find it in a Google Analytics goal that's been configured. And then we can say that the required data sources for this particular piece of data would be the Google Analytics data set. Whereas down here I may take my online orders not from a web or clickstream analytics tool, but I may take that from my platform of record or my system of record, in which case this is where I'm going to get this data. It comes from my system of record and only my system of record. And then if I look at things like a cost per registration, well, now I'm going to have to combine a few different pieces of data. So I may need to get the cost from each of my advertising channels. So I may have to go directly to a Google interface or a Bing interface or Facebook or anywhere else, or any of the DSPs I may be advertising on. But I also have the numerator in that as my GA goal that was the registration that I have to go back and get from Google Analytics. And again, going through this exercise becomes part of that documentation. So I'm now bridging this gap between the stuff that I know I can discuss and it makes perfect sense to me in the context of business, and then all these data sources and the actual pieces of data, the segments, the dimensions, the metrics that I need to drive these KPIs. And I have this clarity now. I have line of sight over exactly what I need to implement technically in order to drive only the things that I care about. And this is, again, a big switch from the way that most people are implementing things like web analytics tools or data infrastructure, where they look at the feature set of the tool and say, well, it supports events and it supports custom dimensions, so let me think of all the things I can shove into that and I'll just start tracking things for no reason. That's really where we get ourselves into that problem of data overload, where we're having a hard time making use out of the data. Going this other direction, starting out with the things I care about, and then figuring out what data and how to configure the data sources that I need to get that data is really the recipe for success here. So that's what we've done. And again, what it is, you can kind of look at this from the column over here on the right to the column to the left as that translation from somebody like me who's very, very technical and likes to speak in JavaScript and whatnot, to Adam, who is also very literate in the technical languages, but also has to speak the language of the C-suite. And that's what we're doing. We're really translating this from coming back with reports of your bounce rate has gone down, your click-through rate has gone up, to the things that matter. Like you've got more dealer contacts, you've got more registration, you've done a good job in converting and driving revenue for the organization. So that's where we're at. And the way we do that, again, we've taken a look at this. So we take a look at all the segments we care about, each of the phases that we care about, and we look at the intersection of that where we've defined these business objectives and the KPIs that drive them. And we've broken those out, we look at the data, we look at the data sources, and then we look at all the available tools and technology that we have, and we just start drawing some lines. So where are we going to get this data, and what do we have to do to configure it? So if we need a goal in Google Analytics, we of course need to collect the data and implement Google Analytics properly to collect the data and measure that goal. If we're looking for sales data out of our system of record, we have to figure out how we're going to interact with that particular data source. And then we have to look at the things like how we're going to merge this data together eventually to get it in the place we want to. But again, that's the unsexy stuff. That's the plumbing. It's the stuff that is enormously important, enormously foundational, but not the focus of this particular webinar. So again, once we've done this, we can go through a very formal process to ensure that we have our IT departments talking to our marketing departments, and as Adam mentioned, not just those departments, but all the stakeholders across the information to ensure that the technical solutions we are implementing are driving real business requirements. And again, this is just one example of one data source. So for a web analytics implementation, whether it's an Adobe Analytics or a Google Analytics or Web Trends or an IBM solution, whatever that happens to be, we started out with this idea of a business requirements document and these KPI definitions. And that's really nothing more than what we've looked at so far. We have this list of the business requirements broken down in a framework. The framework then gives us the KPIs that tell us if we're doing a good or bad job at those. The KPIs are then broken down into the metrics, dimensions, and segments required, and then the sources of that data. From that, we can then go through this and look at all of those ones that require a web analytics solution and put together a formal solution design. And that formal solution design is where we start to get a little bit technical here, but we are collecting all of the data we need. So for the goals we need from Google Analytics, we will configure those in our solution design. We will collect the custom dimensions and the events and all of the different things and components and features of that particular product set that are required to drive these business requirements. And once we've done that, we can very, very clearly draft out the implementation that we need. So again, this is the first time that we actually start writing code. It's a very different process than most implementations that start with the code and then try to back those into the business objectives. So once we have the code written, we can start to do the deployments and configurations. We go through our quality assurance testing. And at the very end, this knowledge transfer step I think is a really, really important one. So whatever data source you're configuring, whether it's a new CRM, a new web analytics tool, whatever it happens to be, coming back and closing this loop with the folks that as Adam mentioned, that were part of those stakeholder interviews at the very beginning when we said, what do you care about and what do you want to measure? Then showing them how to find this data and where it is and what it looks like at the very end. Most of the time, the folks that are making the decisions and using the data are very different than the folks who are involved in the technical implementation, and they have very, very different things that they care about. So closing this loop, I think, is a really important part to any sort of data implementation there. And again, Adam, we've gone through this, and for a lot of people on the line and listening to this webinar, they probably say that's a ridiculously overkill enterprise way to go ahead and deploy something as quote simple as Google Analytics. But having just gone through it, I'm hoping you can kind of give a perspective there.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked at both sort of very large companies and very small companies, and I'd say one of the challenges oftentimes with small companies is that they overlook this step. And so in a past job, as an example, I came into a company that had 3 tiers of customer loyalty. And the first question I asked was, how are those tiers defined? It was gold, silver, and bronze. And nobody actually knew the exact definition of how it was defined. And ultimately, we had to get a DBA to unwind the code and figure out how it was set 2-3 years ago. And it made, which was pretty amazing that for a number of years, people were acting on it on faith, but without understanding the underlying logic or even the underlying source. And I think this type of exercise, while it may, certainly is not glamorous and it may sound overkill, prevents that from happening, because now we have a document of record where anybody in the organization can go and understand the various metrics, the various definitions, the various data sources. And as you grow and as the data grows, it becomes ever that much more important. Another example for us as we sort of went through the exercise was we wanted to look at a variety of metrics across our best customers, our VIPs, so orders by VIPs and other data like that. Turns out we had 3 definitions of VIP in the company. There was one in our system of record. There was another one in Salesforce that we used. There was another Google Doc that was being used by a team that was a different definition. And this process sort of, as we talked a little bit about data governance earlier, really helps focus, put a spotlight on where those issues are coming up, and just forces you as an organization to say, okay, well, this is our definition of VIP. And it's critical because you don't want different departments using the same term and having it mean very different things. And as a marketer, I can assure you that, and I can certainly tell you, our CFO would feel that way as well. And then even, we're fortunate enough to be experiencing growth right now, and we have lots of new people coming on. And so as Dave mentioned, the knowledge transfer is great, but that knowledge transfer happens at a point in time. And so where's the document that new people can use? And while we have sort of people internally who can train them, having that solution design document available for everybody has proven to be incredibly beneficial.
Yeah, and a great point there too is you often hear the analogy that a great data infrastructure is often like a piece of art. You're never finished. You're just constantly having to give up at 5 p.m. on a Friday every once in a while, which is to say that it's always changing. And if you just look back 5 years and look at the advent of technology and the amount of data that we're able to collect and how it's impacted organizations, we could have never predicted it, much less been prepared for it. So having this ability to continue to change and adapt to a world that's rapidly changing by its very definition is something that is fantastically important as well. So we'll kind of move forward here and talk about, now that we've got all that unsexy foundational stuff out of the way, really what that has accomplished is it's given us the data we need, and it's given us trust in that data. So now we know, we've documented, we know where this data comes from, we know how it's been defined, we've validated it, and we know that we are looking at the proper data. So we now trust any of these KPIs that are built on this data. So now it's time to start making this accessible. And this is really all about getting the right information to the right people at the organization at the right time so that they can start to make the right decisions. And we're really going to start to move away from these sorts of traditional reporting structures. So certainly not to say that the reporting structures within tools like Google Analytics or Adobe Analytics or others aren't fantastic, and they are. And they offer a tremendous amount of visibility into the data and ways to explore the data. Tools like Excel can be fantastically useful for a number of different reasons. But what we want to do is take a look at a way to very quickly and easily visualize data in an automated fashion that surfaces exactly what we need in the context in which we need it. And the way we do that is a little bit different than the traditional logging into a reporting suite or logging into 3 or 4 systems to try to get the data you want, dumping it into Excel, and then doing some manipulation. What we're doing here is we're taking this kind of under-the-water iceberg of data that we've now gone through the practice and the process of installing correctly and integrating, and then we're going to combine that data so that we can have all of these different KPIs that may have lots of different data sources coming into one place that we can start to see at whatever level of depth we want. So at the very highest level, we have that iPad report that shows us green is good, red is bad, here's where we should focus our time. And then when we drill into those, we have these interactive reports that we're able to mine the data, explore the data, and mess around with this data to answer very specific questions, all within the context of these business requirements. So at this point, the underlying technology and the unsexy stuff extends a little bit into things like enterprise data warehouses and finding out how to use the best APIs or extracting the data in the right ways, combining it and doing extract, transform, load processes, all those different things that are required to get the data prepared the first time. But once those are done and all those processes are put in place and all those processes have been automated, suddenly we no longer have a monthly report that we all scramble for a week to put together. We have an always-on, always accurate reporting interface that gives us what we need and allows us to explore the data to make the decisions we need to make at any point in time. And again, we've now saved those 4, 5, 10 hours a month that we're using to create these reports in a static fashion, and all of those hours can now be used for analysis or making use of the data to make better decisions within the organization. So this is what we're after. And the way we do this, I'm going to talk specifically here again with First Dibbs in the convert segment that we've been focused on here. We're actually at that point with First Dibbs right now where the implementation is complete. We have the data that we need here, and we're working towards this visualization stage. So what I'm showing you here are some working prototypes that are pulling from multiple data sources and giving that information. And of course, I've blurred the data here, but to get the idea, you don't necessarily need to see the numbers. In this particular phase, if we looked at that high-level database dashboard, for example, and saw that we're having problems with conversion, so that whole column is turned red, we can click into that for a little bit more detail, and we have a very interactive report here. And this report is all built out on those business requirements around conversion. So if we start to look at some of the things that are in this report, we can see that those KPIs that we had defined that are very, very business friendly, and that makes sense to anyone who is analyzing the business, are reflected in the pick lists and the drop downs here on the right hand side. So in this particular report, which is built in Tableau, but there's lots of other data visualization and data exploration platforms out there, we can very quickly load all of this data from the various data sources. So some of this data is coming from Google Analytics, some comes from the platform of record, some is coming from advertising sources. All of this data is prepped and ready and stuck in this particular visualization, so that just by dropping down a menu, I can start to change all of my graphs and all of my visualizations across the various KPIs that I care about with respect to actual conversions here. Now, the other thing that I have is this pick list under the conversion percentage, where I can start to do some mathematical functions on these. So all of those cost per or revenue per, I can automatically calculate those things, the cost per or revenue per any one of these particular items that I care about. And again, everything changes as soon as I do that, and I can see based on date comparisons and whatnot, I can compare against month on month, year on year, quarter on quarter, week on week, whatever I need to look at, and start to see very clearly how things are trending. Now again, that's useful in the fact that I can also apply these segments right here in the interface. So I may look at that at an aggregate level and say, I'm doing a great job with getting new registrations on the site, but let's take a look at how that breaks down by my advertising channels. So I can start to look at this by medium, or I could look at it by the tactic and see if I'm doing better in the upper funnel than the lower funnel. Or I could even look at some of the user segments that I've defined here, and because I've gone through this process, I now have a very clear definition of what those are. And I can then see how do different buyer types compare. So all of this becomes a very real and very explorable set of data that gives me real information very quickly and allows me to make some really good decisions. And that's kind of where we go at the end of this. We can start to ask questions of the data, and we never have to log into Google Analytics. We never have to log into any of the advertising platforms. We never have to do a query or request a query from our business intelligence team against a central database. We can start to use this dashboard and these data visualizations to answer questions like, what is the best channel to target different buyer types in order for me to complete a specific goal, in this case more online orders? And what I do is I drop into this particular visualization, and then I just choose the information that I want to look at. So I can choose a segment of the medium to start to see how each of these channels is impacting the actual type of order, the type of conversion I want, which in this case is an online order. And then I can look at the segment of buyer type to see how they compare. And you can see over here, I'll just blow this up a little bit, all of my data now changes, and I'm able to see by each of my channels and also by each of my buyer types. I can then start to see very quickly which ones jump out, which ones are having issues, which ones are opportunities, and then I can make some real decisions here, like spend some more of my cost per click dollars on the buyer types or the targeting that's going after these buyer types that are converting better and worth more for my business. And maybe look at some of the SEO programs or some of the other channels that I've got that are underperforming and reallocate those budgets somewhere else so that I can, again, drive the business forward and answer some real business questions. Because if I do this, I can always tie this back to that business objective of the online orders. I can drop this back to all the other KPIs that I care about, and in aggregate I can very, very quickly tie this back to those business objectives that had to do with that conversion component of the customer journey. That again is the language that we're speaking back in the C-suite. So you know, I know, Adam, you're in the throes of this right now, and looking to play with some of these prototypes, but more importantly, getting ready to make these part of the organization. So just some thoughts around what this is going to enable for First Dibbs.
Yeah, so the appetite organizationally for these is huge. As you said, we've been prototyping them. For us, ultimately, we will build these in a cloud BI platform called Burst, but I think to your point, it's really platform agnostic. It's getting the right questions asked, finding the right data, and then you layer on the visualization on top of that. I think, you know, the thing that we've been balancing is, you know, the robustness of dashboards that allow for exploration, exactly like the ones that you were showing, and those that, you know, somebody just wants to press a button every minute, every hour to check on performance of an area that's either key to them, or you sort of, you know, given the topic as you go up, sort of key to the department or key to the company. And, you know, they're very different types of dashboards depending on what the ultimate objective is. But it's, you know, it's never ending. So every time we satisfy demand internally, there's much greater demand. And I think, you know, that's, you know, important for everybody to realize that while, you know, we're incredibly excited about having gone through this journey and, you know, all the efficiencies that we've gained and the knowledge that we've gained, but it's, you know, our pipeline for data requests is more today than it was when we began, because the more that we, you know, empower both the marketing group and other departments, just the heavier demand there is for new dashboards and more information. And so, as Dave said earlier, it's never ending.
Yeah, so be careful what you wish for, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah. But really exciting, and I think you made a great point too as well. The difference between a static informational dashboard and one that can be explored is actually one that should be designed for. And that data architecture and that aggregate data set, that under the water part of the iceberg, actually enables a whole slew of different reporting options. And of course, we focused here at the American Marketing Association on some marketing specific questions and reports. But as Adam mentioned at the very beginning, this goes back to operational objectives from the organization too. Finance teams and supply and everything else can certainly benefit from these same sorts of processes. So with that, we have gone through the content that we have for you today. One quick thing to mention from the side of Cardinal Path is if you have interest in having a quick conversation or an assessment of the KPIs that you and your organization are working towards, we'd be happy to hear from you. Just mention this webinar and we'll get you set up with a free consultation. And with that, I guess we will go ahead and pass it back to Anthony and start to take some questions.
Great. Thanks so much, David. And Adam, thank you as well. We do have a number of questions that have come in, so we'll go ahead and start addressing those. But just really quickly, a reminder to everyone, if you do still have a question and you want to get that in, use that chat feature that you see there to the left of your screen and put your question there. And also you can send it in on Twitter. I know some questions have come in that way as well, so feel free to do it there, and we'll add them to the queue and get to as many as time allows. So with that, our first question actually is one that did come in from Twitter, from Sarah, and she wants to, she first comments, she said, looks like some of the screenshots look like they might be from Clipfolio. So she wants to know if you can maybe just recommend some programs that someone can use to kind of build theirs and kind of get started with this whole process.
Yeah, so those screenshots were mostly from Tableau. Clipfolio is a great partner of ours. We've worked with those guys for a long, long time and a fantastic choice from the SaaS side of things. But there's a number of tools and technologies out there that kind of run the gamut from more of your SaaS offerings where you can click a button, enter some account details, and connect to various popular data sources like your Salesforces and Google Analytics and those sorts of things, and then manipulate the data. And Clipfolio certainly falls within that grasp. Specifically to Google Analytics, they even have some kind of predefined connections you can build out there that are great. On the more explorative side or some of the more robust enterprise level solutions, you've got a number. Adam mentioned Burst is the tool being used and deployed there. I'd mentioned Tableau was the one we did our prototyping in, but there are of course many others, Click and Spotfire and many. Some good resources on the web if you just do a quick search around data visualization or dashboarding solutions. Click around and start to see which ones are doing the right things for you. Let's see.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, kind of going along those lines, there's a question here on specifically how does this work with CRM data. As I mentioned, a lot of these visualization tools will have direct connectors into popular CRM platforms. Otherwise, you can certainly extract and merge customer data from the CRM platform of your choice back in a data warehouse or through any of the ETL tools that are out there, something like an analytics canvas. And many folks are creating keys between customer level data and web analytics data or other operational data that allows you to then put together some joint reports. So you may see the customer record along with some of the web-based activity that they've done in a logged in or authenticated state all in one place. So lots of great ways to use customer data and augment the other data sources that you have in there.
Great, thanks so much, Dave. And actually, we've had this coming from some different individuals here. So just to kind of maybe hit on this is, a lot of individuals maybe that are kind of starting this whole process. So if someone, were to want to do that, get this started within their own organization, what would you say is maybe like the one thing or, one place that someone can get started?
Yeah, Adam, I'd say that's a great question for you, having started that.
Yeah. So, I mean, not to sort of plug Cardinal Path, but I called Dave. So that was sort of my, way of dealing with it. I'd say, It is a difficult thing for, we're a relatively small team. We're focused on so many day-to-day fires and tasks and analysis. And so to pull yourself out of that and sort of perform the exercise can be difficult. It's certainly feasible. It's why, I called up Cardinal Path. We had worked with them before on some, Google Analytics implementation, but not sort of taking it to the next level. But to the extent that you want to sort of bootstrap it, look, I think it's identifying somebody in your organization to start talking to the stakeholders in your company about what are the questions that we want answered, to Dave's earlier point, that map back to our business objectives. So it's not the metrics, it's the business objectives, and then figuring out underneath those what are the business metrics that are going to propel visibility into that.
And Adam, another question that came in actually for you from Twitter as well is, do you have a resource that's really dedicated to creating these dashboards? Someone who's kind of doing this full time.
So we do not have a full-time dashboard person. We work with some freelance help on the dashboarding. Cardinal Path helped on the dashboards that you saw. We do have some people internally who can do what I would call simple dashboarding, but the more advanced we've gone out and gotten extra help for.
And is there kind of an average or a typical setup time that you might want to share in getting all of this started?
It's like building a house. It all depends on how big it is and what you want to put in it. I'd say this engagement from start to finish, which included also a migration over to Google Universal Analytics, which had its own sort of work stream, was about 3 months. Had we taken some parts out of it, it could have been less. But it's definitely a commitment of time, and more importantly than just the start and finish. I can't, as I said earlier, can't emphasize enough how important it is to get sort of cross-functional buy-in, and that means, a lot of people sitting down over the course of those 2-3 months.
Great, thank you.
And I just add, sometimes that is the difference between long and short, or maybe long and longer. But it is really important to make sure that you're getting all those different perspectives, because like Adam said, different people have very different uses for different sets of data that are coming from even the same sources in many cases.
Great, and probably got time for a couple of more questions here. Next one is, so who would you say are the key stakeholders in an organization that you really need to get that buy-in from, and who needs to be involved for a KPI project to really be successful?
Yeah, Adam, maybe you can take a stab at that from the first Dibbs perspective, and I can take a little bit more of a generic stab from the things that we see on a typical basis.
Yeah, from sort of from a buyer marketing standpoint, there are really 3 key areas. There's marketing, there's our product development arm, and there's finance, because a lot of these metrics like cost per acquisition, cost per customer, need to be vetted by the finance department. So if your KPIs aren't approved by finance, they're not necessarily going to be very helpful. But as I mentioned at the beginning, we also we are a site for 2,000 dealers, and we provide them metrics as well. And so we have a whole dealer relations team that's responsible for that, that's critical to having them be involved in those dashboards. And so it all depends on your organization, but it's hard to imagine that there's not a sort of operational function that shouldn't have a seat at that table.
Yeah, and that's a pretty good overview. The only one I would add specifically would be representation from the CTO's office or the IT group, because ultimately a lot of this is going to interact with a larger data stack or larger set of tools and systems and technologies that are managed by that group, who really may not care as much about the KPIs, but really has a vested interest and is crucial in the process of setting up, maintaining, and keeping this thing going.
Great. And next question here, probably going to be our final question, but this one's coming in from Wen. And question is, how would you define the success of display programs, and how would you present it to the C-suite, given that it is a bit harder and it takes more steps to tie it to the dollars or to the cost?
Yeah, that's a great question. Myself and another founding partner at Cardinal Path, Corey Koberg, wrote a few hundred pages about this in the Display Advertising an Hour a Day book. And I think it is a challenge. Even after going through all of that, it is hard to tie direct response dollars to upper funnel campaigns that are typically associated with display, with the exception of retargeting campaigns, which are typically the display format that are aimed at the lower funnel. But I think the way you do it is through this kind of visualization. So understanding that this display is targeted at someone that's early in that customer journey. So it's not necessarily to get someone to pull the trigger on that purchase that they just left in their shopping cart or are really thinking about buying right now. It's more getting that branding and awareness message out there, positioning yourself in the right ways so that when it is time for someone to fulfill that need, they're using a different medium, something like a search or any of the other channels that you're investing in to actually finish that transaction. Now, of course, there are lots of tools out there. All the enterprise web analytics tools will have, at the very least, basic attribution modeling, where you can look at things like first touch versus last touch, or even assists and things like the multi-channel funnel reports of Google Analytics. Of course, Adobe has additional tools you can work on to understand at what point this particular display channel was part of a conversion, even if it wasn't driving the visit that ended up in a conversion. And then over on the more sophisticated side, you certainly have traditional attribution modeling, data science projects you can do, or tools that you can use that will help you to model and predict the impact of each of those channels on the ultimate goals. And that could be for both online or offline. One of the pieces of work we just did recently was online to offline intent modeling that used a lot of those signals from online campaigns that included display, and then modeling how often that actually drove someone into a physical store to purchase and activate.
Excellent. Well, Dave and Adam, thank you both so much. This has been a lot of great information that you shared with the audience. So on behalf of everyone, I do want to thank you both for putting all the time and effort into bringing this together and for sharing this time with us today. Thank you both.
Thank you. It's been great.
Thanks.
And just a couple of quick reminders to everyone as we do wind up today's webcast. As mentioned at the beginning, we are recording all of this great information. It's going to be shared with you through a recording link, so look for that coming your way soon. To those of you that were on Twitter with us today, thank you so much for your participation there. Really appreciate that. If you weren't able to engage, you can still go post-webcast and engage at #MarketingDataForC-Suite. So in closing, I want to extend a big thank you to Cardinal Path for sponsoring this webcast, as well as to ReadyTalk for providing the platform that we used. And if you'd like to learn more about ReadyTalk and their services, you can go to readytalk.com/AMA. Of course, I want to thank you, the audience, for sharing an hour from your busy day with us. We certainly hope you found this information helpful and look forward to seeing you again very soon on another AMA Thought Leader webcast. That does end our presentation for today. Thanks again for joining, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.